This was a new tidbit. I had not heard about this initiative before. Netanyahu also announced his vision for a broader Mideast. Another bit of information that people were eager to hear about had to do with Netanyahu's post-war plans for Gaza. And he spoke directly to the protesters. He also likened gays for Gaza to chickens for KFC. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today made an historic speech to Congress. It was his fourth time doing so, making him the foreign leader who has addressed a joint session of Congress the most times of any leader in the world. I've got my notes, so let's get into it. Here are the top 10 most important takeaways with one bonus note from Netanyahu's July 2024 speech in Washington, D.C. Number 1. First of all, who was there and who skipped out? Most notably absent was Vice President and presumed 2024 Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. As Vice President, she would have presided over Prime Minister Netanyahu's joint congressional address, but instead she attended a fundraising event at an historically black sorority in Indiana. That left Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair Ben Cardin and House Speaker Mike Johnson to preside over the joint address in her absence. Others that were notably absent: former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Representative Ayanna Pressley, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Jamal Bowman, Bernie Sanders, and other progressive Democrats, but not Palestinian-American Rashida Tlaib, who showed up wearing a keffiyeh and holding a sign that she flipped periodically to say either war criminal or guilty of genocide. I'm going to have to add here that I found that to be personally in poor taste, and perhaps she should have rethought that because of the fact that there were hostage families present and a rescued hostage, Noah Argamani, who attended with her father. And when the camera showed Argamani in the audience, I also noticed, strangely, that Elon Musk was randomly seated behind her. Number 2, Netanyahu immediately addresses the war in Israel as a fight between good and evil. He sets this up by describing the threat of Iran to America, Israel, and other Arab friends. And he explains how Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are just proxy forces to Iran, who is the real threat to civilization. And I want to skip ahead here real quick because he also talks about the threat of Iran later in the speech as well. And I think he quite eloquently describes the real and dangerous threat that Iran poses to the world. He says Iran is behind all of the terror groups and explains how Hamas uses its civilian population. He distinguishes between Israel and Hamas by saying that for Israel, every death is a tragedy, while for Hamas, every death is a strategy. And no matter what you think of Benjamin Netanyahu's politics, there's no denying that he is an excellent communicator. Netanyahu takes Congress on a history lesson, reminding them that when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over Iran in 1979, he pledged to export their revolution to the entire world. Now, in true expert communicator fashion, he asks Congress what country stands in the way of Iran's extreme plan to impose radical Islam all over the world? And the answer, of course, is America, which he describes as the guardian of Western civilization and the world's greatest power. That's why he says Iran sees America as an obstacle. He says Hezbollah recently let it slip that Israel is a tool and that the main war is with America. And he says that's the whole point of fighting with Israel, is to come in between Israel and America. Later on, of course, he says he won't let that happen. He says that's why in 1979, the Iranians stormed the American embassy. They held scores of Americans hostage for 444 days. Iran terrorist proxies have targeted America all over the world, including in Beirut and in Africa. And he says that in Iraq, they supplied explosives to maim and kill thousands of American soldiers. In America, they sent death squads here to murder a former Secretary of State and a former National Security Advisor. And recently, we have heard that Iran also had a plot to try and assassinate former President Donald Trump. He says Iran understands that in order to truly conquer America, they first must conquer the Middle East, and standing in Iran's way is one proud, pro-American democracy, which is Israel. That's why he explains that mobs in Iran chant death to Israel, death to America, because first they're coming for Israel and then they come for America. They call it the little Satan and the big Satan. Netanyahu also says that when Israel acts to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons that could destroy Israel and threaten every American city, they're not just protecting themselves, they're also protecting America. Fast forward a little bit, Netanyahu then goes on to ask America for support, including weapons. And he says that in exchange, Israel has given America some really significant intelligence, which has saved the lives of countless people, and that Israel and America have jointly developed some of the most sophisticated weapons on earth that help protect both of their countries and help keep American troops off the ground while protecting their shared interests in the Middle East. Number 3, let's talk about the guests. Obviously, Noah Argamani, who was rescued from the clutches of Hamas during an heroic operation. The Bibas family members and other hostage families were recognized. And it was notable that Netanyahu, in response to this newly emerging white colonizer false narrative that's emerged unjustly about Israel, made a point to highlight Israel's diverse population through their October 7th military heroes, including Lieutenant Avichail Ruvain, whose family immigrated from Ethiopia, and Master Sergeant Ashraf al-Bakhiri, a Bedouin soldier from Israel's Muslim community. Netanyahu basically said what us Israelis take for granted, but it is worth repeating that Muslim, Jewish, Druze, and Christian men and women from all walks of life make up the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli population. And I think it's great that he knows to do this as a communicator, to repeat the things that Israelis take for granted. It is a very diverse population, and he understands that you have to repeat the truths because the people that don't want you to know what Israel really is about will repeat the lies. And if you say a lie enough times, you need to say the truth even more in order to combat that. Number 3, Netanyahu did not shy away from reminding Congress why we were here in this war in the first place. He bluntly describes the brutality of October 7th that led us to where we are today, including talking about beheadings, family murders of parents in front of children, children in front of parents, rapes and kidnappings. Netanyahu understands that Americans can relate to 9/11, so he explained that proportionate to the population, Israel's 10-7 was like 29 9/11s. Number 4, information about hostage release. And unfortunately, he did not give any new information except to say that Israel will not rest until all loved ones are home, and that Israel is actively engaged in efforts, even at this moment, to secure the release, but unfortunately, he didn't elaborate. Number 5, Netanyahu declared that Israel has a right to defend herself and defended the decision to enter Rafah, seemingly contradictory to the Biden administration's stance and particularly contradictory to a recent interview in which Harris seemingly admonishes Israel for entering Rafah. He also acknowledged the 80,000 citizens of northern Israel who have been evacuated from their homes due to the conflict with Lebanon and are basically refugees in their own country, and he declares that Israel can and will push back. Number 6, another bit of information that people were eager to hear about had to do with Netanyahu's post-war plans for Gaza. He said Israel has no intention of resettling Gaza. He said his vision of a new Gaza is one that is demilitarized and de-radicalized. Netanyahu says Gaza should have a civilian administration run by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel, but noticeably, he made no mention of the Palestinian Authority or any specific Palestinian group that might potentially help to kind of reclaim Gaza and restructure it. Number 7, Netanyahu also announced his vision for a broader Mideast. He says he wants to forge a Middle East security alliance to counter Iranian threats. He said invited to join this alliance would be all countries that make peace with Israel and that will make peace with Israel. He says the new alliance would be a natural extension of the Trump administration's groundbreaking Abraham Accords, which he proposes should be called the Abraham Alliance. This was a new tidbit. I had not heard about this initiative before. Number 8, I'm going to add my personal commentary here to say that I think that Netanyahu understands his audience and that his audience for this speech was not just America, it was also Israel and also Iran. And that brings us to his talk of the anti-Israel protests. On that topic, he says that courage and clarity is necessary, and clarity begins with knowing the difference between good and evil. He says that anti-Israel protesters choose to stand with evil and Hamas rapists and murderers. And he spoke directly to the protesters for standing with the tyrants of Tehran who kill gay people for existing and kill women for not covering their hair. Netanyahu then called these protesters, words that Hamas uses themselves to describe those who don't align with their beliefs but help them with their cause. He called them useful idiots. He also likened gays for Gaza to chickens for KFC, and it was at this point that there was a clear disparity in regards to applause from Republicans and applause from Democrats. 9. In addressing the situation in Gaza, he talked about the myth of the famine. He explained how Israel has allowed thousands of trucks into the strip and that they've calculated that the food being brought in is equivalent to more than 3,000 calories per person per day. He described the extraordinary measures the army takes to prevent casualties. But one thing I think he may get pushback for is saying that there have been almost no civilian Palestinian casualties except for the incident in which some shrapnel ignited Hamas explosives, killing about 24 people. He didn't stay with this. He was just steadfast in talking about Israel's army as the most moral army in the world. And he did give examples, I have to say. He did explain it and lay it out. He maybe could have gone a little bit more. It's not his style, but perhaps he could have acknowledged that in war things happen and that Hamas uses their civilians as human shields. I don't really know what the numbers are, so I don't know if I can say that he's right or not right, accurate or not accurate. I know that it has been said that Hamas themselves have said that their own numbers are not accurate, so this is a probably really difficult part of war reporting, to get the numbers when you're fighting a terrorist organization. All right, moving on. Number 10, he gave some significant thank yous. Netanyahu thanked Biden for all of his support to Israel, including during this war, and also aligning with Israel by identifying as a Zionist and explaining to the world that you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. He also leaned into the fact that he's known Biden for more than 40 years. Netanyahu also thanked former president and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump for his support as well, including his work on the Abraham Accords, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and in general, always standing behind Israel. I know that a lot of people have problems with Benjamin Netanyahu, but as Prime Minister, he is Israel's representative, and this being an election year, I definitely noticed who he acknowledged and who he ignored. It was noticeable to me that he did not say Harris's name at all, making it feel as though perhaps, I mean, she didn't show up anyway, but perhaps both of them were distancing each other from Israeli affairs. Just something I noticed that felt a little off. And bonus number 11, Netanyahu finished with a strong and undeniable proclamation that Jerusalem is Israel's eternal capital and that Israel and America are undeniable allies and Iran can never come between them. He also said that with nearly 4,000 years of history, Israel is the Jewish ancestral homeland and Jews are not going anywhere. While feeling a sense of pride, it also felt like a reminder of how far this war has pushed Israel and the Palestinians. You know, as I mentioned in the previous points, the door was not fully closed forever. There was still hope in the speech, but right now it just doesn't seem like that reconciliation is close, especially with not all the kidnappees home, and especially with Hamas still in power. So it's a long time from the Oslo Accord days. And while it ended with an up note and with a lot of feeling and emotion, there was yet no indication on when the war would end. So what do you think? Do you think that this was a good speech? Do you have some critique to make? What about the people that showed up or the people that didn't show up? Do you think it's inappropriate to not show up for a foreign leader who comes to address Congress during a time of war? And what was significant about this speech for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, so please drop me a line. Bye.